Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Welcome to the sixth webcast in the Voices from Gaia webcast series. My name is Mare Cromwell, and I'm so honored to be hosting this Voices from Gaia series with some exceptionally gifted communicators who are speaking for the dolphins, whales, Sasquatch, and more from January 17th to March 7th. And as I've mentioned in the other webcast, Mother Gaia specifically requested this series. I work very closely with her. So she is very eager for the wisdom from these other intelligences and conscious beings around the planet to come forward in a more prominent way these days. So our guest tonight, I'm very, very honored to have our guest tonight, is a remarkable woman named Penny Kelly. And Penny is truly a Renaissance woman. She is a writer, teacher, author, publisher, consultant, and naturopathic physician who has a strong connection with the nature spirit realms in addition to everything else that she does. She is the owner of Lily Hill Farm in Southwest Michigan, where she teaches courses in developing intuition and the gift of consciousness, getting well naturally, and organic gardening. Early in Penny's career, she was an engineer for Chrysler and then went on to study the brain, consciousness, intelligence, intuition, and cognition. She worked as a consultant in those fields for 15 years. Penny bought a farm in the 1980s and then raised grapes for Welch's for 12 years. And we're going to learn more about that tonight because she actually made a deal with the Elves on her farm to help her produce massive amounts of grapes. So she now runs Lily Hill Learning Center, where she teaches and has a naturopathic practice. Penny is also the mother of 4 children. She's a very busy woman and has co-written or edited 23 books with others. She's also written 7 books of her own. Penny, I don't know how you juggle all this. So I'm going to I'm going to open it up now to Penny. And Penny, we don't have you on video. Can you open up your video at the bottom of the Zoom screen? If you scroll down there, there's an option.
I tried that before. It says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it. So it's ready to go.
So you can't open your video at all?
No, it says that you had stopped it or have control over it somehow.
Okay,
okay.
Oh, there you are. Yay. Okay, wonderful. Okay. We're having some technical difficulties tonight.
Okay.
But we're still here.
All right.
So Penny, I would love for you to share a little bit more. And those of you who are hearing some audio, there's some interesting background noise it's not that somebody else's audio is on. We're having some background noise. It could be the amount of energy that Penny moves through her system because of all her gifts. So just bear with us. All right. So Penny, please would you tell us a little bit more about yourself? You're so fascinating.
There's really not a whole lot to tell that isn't, already out there in some form or fashion. I live as a farmer at this point in time on a farm, and have a very, very, very large house that has a large B&B. I run that B&B. It's 20,000 square feet. And it is, I write. When I write something, I write in a very disciplined way. But, I think the key thing for people is, and maybe we'll get to talk about a little bit about this later, is that we're designed to evolve. And I have done some of that evolution. And it moves a huge amount of energy through the energy body. And it causes havoc, with equipment sometimes. But there was a long period, about 17 years, where I was struggling with full-blown Kundalini, and that was really the genesis of all the the clairvoyance and the clairaudience and, all that kind of stuff. So, all of the stuff I do is the result of an influx of humongous amounts of energy. I very seldom get sick, although I got the flu and I'm just recovering. So forgive me if I get into a bout of coughing or sneezing or whatever. And I sound a little...
Yeah, I'm so grateful you're feeling better, because I know up until this weekend or so, you were really, really sick. So let me ask you a question then. So when you were a child, you didn't have these clairvoyant or clairaudient experiences. It happened with your Kundalini experience?
Yeah. I didn't have any familiarity with anything that would be in the metaphysical realms at all. And when Kundalini happened, I was 31, and overnight, boom, you have all, that's why Kundalini is dangerous, and a lot of people end up in asylums or psychiatric hospitals or whatever, because there's nobody who understands what that awakening process is and what actually happens during that process. So yeah, it was very sudden, boom, and even with that, it was still, I'm going to say, a long, slow process of learning to integrate those skills. So you can get all the skills, but you still have to go back and, I'm going to say, restructure your own psyche in order to be able to use those wisely and well.
Fascinating. Gosh, we could have a whole conversation just about Kundalini, but we want to focus on the nature spirits.
Okay.
Although I'm open. I mean, and by the way, for everyone who's listening tonight, my hope is we can open up for questions again as we did last week, because we're going to have time for that. That's my hope. So I want to read the description briefly of your book, The Elves of Lily Hill Farm, because it's just so interesting. So this book, which I've just ordered and I can't wait to read, is your story of meeting with a group of elves and the deal you made with them to produce 100 tons of grapes from 13 acres of vineyards. Was that in 1 year or total?
1 year.
Oh my God. So without the use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, as a result of this deal, you entered the private world of plants, insects, animals, devas, and nature spirits, where communication among them is common, but the rules are all different. So will you talk about that and what happened? Was it just one day you were outside, you had already had the Kundalini experience, and next thing you know, did you see them also?
Yeah, let me preface this by saying this. When anyone, doesn't matter who it is on a path to spiritual awakening, there are three major doorways into that awakening, into deeper awakening. The first one is through the body. The second one is through nature. And the third one is through community, through your social community or the place that you work. So the nature, the opening to nature was this totally unexpected door, totally. And I thought I knew a lot until I met these elves, and oh my. And then I had lesson after lesson after lesson in humility and, just all kinds of really serious rethinking kinds of lessons courtesy of these elves. But it basically started because I was very upset one day. We were right on the edge of war with Kuwait. Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait, and I was absolutely terrified that my son was going to be drafted and put into the army and, end up going somewhere shooting people. And I knew from my growing up with my father, who, survived World War II. He was one of 62 in a company, and only 2 came back alive. And he never quite recovered from that. And I didn't want that for my son. I mean, my father was a wonderful man. He had his bricks in a pile. He was really a good worker. He was smart. He was intelligent. When he came back from the war, he was not interested in anything except family and love and his children and a little house and a little garden and stuff like that. So, so I go out for a walk, and in my frustration in not being able to figure out and not being able to see how was I going to affect this war so that it didn't get a hold of my son, I ended up just blasting out this question, if there's any elves out here, would you say something? It was kind of a desperation move. And they did say something, and, the rest was history. It was tentative. It was very tentative at first. I was sure I was imagining what I was hearing, and I couldn't see them at first. But, after a while, I could see them. And we have, to this day, that was 1990, in the autumn of 1990 when I met them. And so this is 2018. We're now 28 years into that relationship. And it has been quite the relationship. So
it's interesting that you called out to the elves. For some reason, I thought you were working more closely with the fairies, and that was my apologies to you for not understanding that.
No, that's all right.
So for those who don't know a lot about the nature spirits, can you talk a little bit, Penny, about, they obviously live in another dimension or set of dimensions?
Yes and no. And I want to make a comment about fairies. Fairies, let me say it this way. Fairies take shape and form when you call to them, period. Every other thing has a form of intelligence that is the basis of that, whether it's a rock or a tree or a plant or a flower or whatever, a pumpkin, a green bean. Everything has a base intelligence that forms that shape and that governs the dynamics and the function of that form. And that is basically what we refer to as elves. Those intelligences are so old and so powerful that they have been able to gather energy, which we'll maybe talk about a little bit later, and have been able to evolve their ability to present themselves in a variety of different ways. And so that's basically, an elf is a nature spirit, okay? Fairies are forms that, one of the women that I know attended one of my talks in California, brought this whole bunch of photos, and she had gotten to the point she decided, I want to communicate with the elves or with the fairies or with something. So she took her camera outside and pointed it up at the sky and said, fairies, if there's any fairies around here, show yourself, do something. And it took about 3 weeks of her taking pictures of nothing. And all of a sudden, the relationship, and this is an important point, if you're going to have a relationship with a plant or a tree, it isn't automatic. You have to earn their trust. It's like you getting to know any other person or being. You have to reach out, and then you have to prove yourself honorable, and then you have to, you have to offer something besides just commands and demands and, that kind of thing, expectations and assumptions. And so, she now is able to photograph whole armies of fairies. And I don't like to use military language, but I mean, that's the best.
Large groups, we'll say large groups.
Putting, yeah. Excuse me. So there's this whole confusion, I think. And there's an intelligence with water That's an element, a water elemental. There's an intelligence with air or wind. That's the wind elemental. Same with the earth, same with fire. You know, those all of those intelligences associated with our earth elements are called or referred to as elementals. All of the elves, if you ask them, just exactly what are you? Where do you come from? What are you doing here? They'll tell you, we are the intelligences that manage your flowers, your fruit, your vegetables, your plants, etc. And, we present ourselves in this form because you will recognize us if we present ourselves this way. And that's one of the gifts of being so ancient, that they have been able to learn that.
Do the elves focus on the plant kingdom then? They work closely with the plants. Is that an assumption?
Mostly.
And is there another group of nature spirits that work with the stones?
It's the same. That would be an elemental. But they're all very, those are our labels.
Yeah.
They don't see themselves that way.
Okay.
And when I say that they don't see themselves, they are incredibly brilliant beings, very, very brilliant, and there's and they have an agenda, and they, over the 28 years or whatever it's been that I have been in communication with them, I have come to understand that, why they reached out to me and why they wait. They're waiting for the rest of the population to wake up and to, how they put it is, pick up the conversation. Because in their view, the world is not running very well. The world is not running smoothly. And from their point of view, it's because, if I can be so crass as to say, and this is their words, we don't know what the heck you guys are trying to do. And they're waiting for input from us so they can work with us. Mm-hmm. And according to them, we used to have a huge relationship. And the world was very, very different. The world ran very differently.
So, in your conversations with them, do they give you a sense of how long ago it was that things started to shift away from our capacity to work closely with them and communicate with them?
Yeah, they have. There have been two critical periods when there were big changes. One was I'm going to say about 50,000 years ago, and the other one was about 12 to 13,000 years ago. And both of those shifts came from what I'm going to call huge earth changes. And it's a long story. It's very interesting. Oh my. But the whole consciousness, we lost the ability to connect with them. And that was the beginning of the end of the relationship. And their attitude now is, come on, we can't go any further without you.
So when you say go further, they're talking about evolution. They're talking about the evolution of consciousness here on the planet, because they see that humans have regressed so much.
So let me tell you a little story, okay?
Please. This is so interesting.
Okay, so I have a lot of clients, and they're from all over the world, but I had a client who was in Lansing, Michigan, and she was a computer programmer, and and I worked with her for quite a while, and then I didn't see her. She was, she had gotten all the answers she wanted, and so I didn't see her for, I'm going to say, a year or two. And I, in that in that interim, I had put out the book, The Elves of Lily Hill Farm. So she knew about the book, and she got it, and she read it. She decided she was going to try and contact elves. And I don't know whether, I think she had some limited success. So one day she's out in her yard, and this is the story she tells me. So let me back up just a little bit. So I hadn't heard from her for a couple of years, and all of a sudden she makes an appointment, and she comes in, and she sets 3 items on the table. One is a blue stone, kind of a blue-gray rock. The other is a card, a white card with a cross on it, and a circle. There was a circle, and then there was a cross inside the circle. And she said, I was in my yard, and a little elf named Alvy appeared and asked me to bring you this stone and to bring you this card with a circle and a cross on it. And she said, so that's why I made the appointment. You know, does this mean anything to you? And I'm like, no. You know, the stone, I was freaking out at the stone, but the circle and the cross, I had no idea what that was about. But just, you know, I don't know if it was a couple of months, I can't remember now, I'd have to go back and look at my notes. But I had been having a conversation with the elves, and I had been focused on, in my research, because I've got like 40 years of research into consciousness now, and I was focused on bringing things from one dimension into another to show that it could be done. And so I was out talking with the elves in the back, and one of the elves picked up this blue-gray stone, and she said, here, you know, find this in your reality. And I'm, you know, I'm looking at the stone, and I'm thinking, there's a million blue-gray stones in our reality. It'd be a needle in a haystack kind of thing. So then she snatches the stone away from me and says, you know, good luck or something like that. And I'm like, okay. So I think it's a useless kind of you know, task. But I had noted a couple of things about the stone, and so when I saw that blue-gray rock sitting on my desk, I was like, OMG, there's the blue-gray stone. And the fact that this woman traveled, you know, whatever it is, 2 hours from my house to Lansing to bring me this rock and this card, this, you know, maybe 5 by 6 inch card with a circle and a cross in the circle, was like, what? Oh, I just didn't know what to make of it. And it took a while, but I happened to run across some research later on when I was writing my Consciousness and Energy Volume 1 book. And in that research, I discovered that the circle with the cross inside of it is an ancient symbol from way back, like 10,000, 12,000 years ago, and it was the symbol of kingship, of the line of Tiamat. I won't go into all that, but Tiamat was one of the dragon queens. She was one of the goddess queens. And that was the symbol of power, grace, kingship, or the ability to lead. And when I came across that passage in my research and the explanation of that, I think I cried 2 days.
So,
yeah.
This is, gosh, your stories must be really amazing over and over and over again. So, you know, I sent you some questions, and I know they're kind of probably a bit mundane for the elves in their realms. But one of the purposes, thank you. One of the purposes of this whole series of interviews is to get the wisdom from these different realms. So if you don't mind me asking these main questions. You've already sort of addressed some of them. According to us, from our human perspective, and we have a very limited sense of history compared to the elves, clearly. In the past year, couple of years, we seem to be going through
Yes.
some extreme times. You know, we are witnessing tremendously damaging hurricanes and forest fires, and some are calling the earth changes. What do the elves have to share with us about that? Are they experiencing any kind of earth changes, or are they just transcending it? Where are they in these realms?
That kind of stuff does almost not affect them. They don't ever seem to have a bad day. They're very, very clear, very clear in the messages that they've given, which those messages are, if you, let me put it this way, they want us to pick up the threads of connection with all of existence. And my own experience is that includes telepathy and communication between all the different types of beings, humans, plants, animals, all the elements, et cetera, et cetera. According to them, none of the earth changes, none of the really bad destruction needs to happen. Partly because none of the winds and rains and ice and snow and water, etc., they really do not wish to create any harm. And there's just a whole slew of messages that they have said over time, often in the form of questions. Why are you people so stuck? And when I said, what do you mean? Stuck, and I'm thinking, well, we kind of are stuck, but they didn't mean stuck the way that I thought they were meaning it. They meant that we were so immobile. They said, when you know that earth changes, or that, that the earth needs to make a change, why don't you move? And I said, well, we can't move our houses. And they said, why do you have a house? Why are you limited to a house? And so then I'm like,
the attachments.
because that's the way we are.
Yeah.
So, so there's, that's right. So according to them, the really big storms can be known ahead of time. According to them, the really serious changes can be known ahead of time, prepared for, and absolutely minimized, if not changed altogether. Storms can be steered, they can be increased if you want an effect. The good side of a mudslide is that it evens out the earth a little bit. The bad side is if you have your house in the way, you're in trouble. And they think that we are absolutely, dense for putting our houses in places where Mother Nature is doing something very, very important and very specific. So earth changes don't bother them because they're always prepared, because they withdraw beforehand. So, and they can't figure out why we don't do something similar. So, another thing that they have, come back again and again is, you guys need to take an active role in communicating with us and with one another. We've lost, and this fits another group of beings that I have communicated with. They said, you've lost your inner authority. You don't have any authority to decide what you want and how you want it to be, or what you don't want. And in one of my conversations with Alvy, I had been talking with somebody I was on a radio interview, and some woman called in, and she was like, I have been trying to get elves to talk to me, and for 25 years, and not one sound, not one communication. And so, she said, I want you to tell that elf of yours to communicate with me. So
oh my
So
God.
I asked her what her name was, and then I go out and I talk with Elvie, and I said, Elvie, there's a woman who's been trying to communicate with you for 25 years. Her name is blah, 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 and she lives in Cincinnati. And he said, nah, we don't talk with doormats. And I was like, oh my.
I don't mean to laugh at her. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Second, now who is Alvy? Because is Alvy one particular elf, or does he have a seniority level in the elf realms, or?
They don't have seniority or hierarchy at all, but there's a whole group of elves. There's probably 15, 16, 17 elves that live on my property that work as a group, and Alvy is kind of the spokesman. There's another elf, a female, her name is Merlina, and there's another one named Kermits. Merlina, after Merlina, the way that she told me her name, it was Merlina, 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 and so I wrote it down as Merlina. And then after the Elves book came out, somebody sent me a book of elves that were known, and especially, over the last 400 or 500 years. And there was a female elf called Lina Mare. And I thought, I wonder if I heard that backwards. I thought she said Merlina, but it could have been Lina Mare. So I thought that was very interesting. And Alvy is very, he's so intelligent. Oh my. They're all really, really intelligent. So, and they have a wonderful sense of humor, and I'm going to say they will poke at humans, but they, it's all done with a spirit of fun. So there's nothing evil or bad about them at all. So it's been a wonderful relationship.
Yeah. So he referred to that one woman as a doormat. And my heart goes out to her. How can we not be doormats? I mean, clearly, I do have this list of questions I want to ask you, but I think let's just run with the flow of this. I mean, and you're giving messages from them, which are so important for us to receive tonight, because we need these messages. And I imagine that most people who are listening tonight or will be listening after this taping, how can we not be a doormat? I
think that they want us to think for ourselves. At one point, I did say to him, well, why me? Why are you talking to me? And he said, because you can. And there was a point in the.
I'm sorry.
Because I have in the world of brainwave frequencies, the range of frequencies at which I can communicate, over which I can communicate and pick up information, is huge. For most people, that's 5 or 6 hertz. From maybe 10 to maybe 15 is their normal, frequency range. Mine has a range of 40. And so I can move into all sorts of dimensions and pick up information. And I think that's what he meant when he said, because you can, because I'm able. The other thing is, he said, at one point I was talking about, another woman who wrote to me and said, if you are so sassy with these elves, if they were talking to me, I would just I would be down on my knees. I would be bending over backwards. And, here I am giving them an argument, questioning what they're doing, saying, well, wait a minute, humans have to deal with this. So I don't know if your strategy is going to work. So there's been a lot of learning that's gone back and forth between both sides, and they have made it clear that that is very, very important. They've lost touch with the things that we are contending with, and we certainly have lost touch with our ability to communicate with them and get them to do or change their strategies or, whatever it is they're doing. And I remember way back in the beginning when I first started communicating with the elves, and then I happened to be working at this place. I remembered seeing this book years before called the Findhorn or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I tried to find that book and I couldn't get it. I found another book called the Findhorn Garden. So I brought it home and I eventually read it. And I thought, oh my God, there's all these things called devas. I'm going to try and communicate with them. So absolutely no luck, time after time after time.
And this was after you had already started working with the elves or before?
That's right. It was after I started working with the elves. Okay. But I hadn't known about things called devas or forms, intelligences called devas. And so I didn't, I wasn't trying to connect with them. And so so this one particular day, I'm out in my flower garden and, and I'm pulling up plants and I'm feeling guilty. I'm like, these are living things. And I'm turning over the dirt and I'm seeing earthworms cut in half and writhing in agony. And I'm like, oh. And so I'm feeling bad. And so I'm trying to tell the weed devas of the various kinds of weeds and the soil and the earthworms, get out of the way. And finally, one diva showed up and said, look, this isn't going to work if you're just going to give orders. It has to be two-way communication. It has to, and she said, you probably should have come out here a day or two ago and given everybody warning that you were going to be digging here and asking these weeds to give up, to let go. And it could have been different. And so I was like, I don't have time for all that. So,
but we need to make time for that, don't we?
Yeah. And that night, I think it was, so anyways, I did it. And the next day, the ease with which the weeds came out, it was like 2 fingers. And I was like, and there were no worms. They were cut in half. And I was like, oh my, this is amazing. And that night, there was a parade of devas that passed through my house, all lined up, one after another, just introducing themselves, because I asked one of them about this. I said, what's the deal? And I was up for hours and hours until 5 a.m, just looking at these and meeting all these different devas. And they were just lined up as far as I could see. They wanted to get a look at a human who was willing to begin communicating. It was such a long time since we have made an effort to connect with them in any meaningful way. And I said to them, what about the people over in Scotland? And they said, that's only one place. You're the second. And I thought, okay.
Wow. Wow. Can I ask you a question about, in the Algonquin language, they're called the Manitous, which are like the overarching nature spirits of a mountain or a valley, because I work with them. And they are beautiful and lovely and powerful. And they one of them actually, just really briefly, I was driving near the mountain near where I live, and the overarching nature spirit, I can't say his name here on videotape. I'm being told not to say his name. But anyway, he and I have a special relationship because I do ceremony on that mountain. And he actually had my clock on my dashboard of the car leap ahead an hour and a half. So I missed the turnoff for a side road on the countryside here. I ended up driving right to the foot of the mountain. He wanted me right there.
That's right.
So I
Yeah.
would say hi to him. And then he's done this a number of times to me where then as I said to him, I can't stay, I can't do any ceremony, I love you so much. Then as I started to drive away down the road, away from the mountain, he gives me a wash of energy. And he's done this for me a number of times where I'll call out to him as I'm driving nearby and I get this wash of energy. Can you speak to
Right.
that level? Because I know there's so many levels of them.
Yeah, there really are. The world of nature spirits is just, it's huge. It's huge. So there are different levels. We had a pond that we wanted to dig in the front. And so, I've been dealing with the elves for a while, and I was like, I don't know if we should be digging up that earth. I'm just going to go out and see if I can, find somebody to say yes. So I came across, I met for the first time the landscape diva. I'll tell you what, Mare, I have never seen anything, any form so beautiful as that landscape diva. There were two of them. There were three of them at first, and then one went away, and then there were just two left. But they were those overarching beings. And they were absolutely stunning. Lights, twinkling, forms of the land within the form of themselves. There are just a huge number. And I remember sitting there thinking, am I seeing that correctly? Is that an illusion? And so there was a long conversation for about an hour, and they just hung there over the pond, the two of them, and they finally said, go ahead. You're going to have a hard time filling that pond, but you can dig a hole there if you like. And, and I was like, okay. And so we did dig the hole, and, 5 years later, it was still empty. And
they gave
it
you
wasn't yeah and now I'm at the point of, I think we'll just fill that in. It was a pond for a very short time, and it was only a pond because we had an old-timer farmer who came to visit and said, what's that hole? And I said, that's supposed to be a pond. And he said, you're not going to have a pond unless you get some geese. And I said, why? And he said, because geese, there'll be there was maybe 2 inches of water, about 3 feet across. And he said, they'll walk around that little edge of water, and they poop. And their poop has specific bacteria in it that seals the ground. And so the water comes up a little further, and they walk around that, and they poop, and that seals, and then the water comes up a little further. And sure enough, pretty soon we had a full pond that was, 70 feet across and 8 feet deep. And when all the geese died, the pond disappeared.
Fascinating. Let me go back to the elves, though, and because one of the things a lot of people are talking about these days in the spiritual communities is the ascension and the shifting of energy for the third to the fourth to the fifth dimension. And is this something that the elves are aware of? They're already in another dimensional space. I know that. I would like to think this gives them hope that humans will start being able to open up to them and hear them. But what is the sense of that?
Let me draw on my own research more so than the elves. First of all, I spent half a dozen years researching dimensions. Because if you read volume 1 of Consciousness and Energy, you'll see why. But in that process, what I discovered was that humans mostly talk about third dimension, fourth dimension, fifth dimension, et cetera, et cetera. And they really don't know what they're talking about. The dimensions, there's an unlimited number of dimensions. And I've been to dozens of them. And they're all different. And so when we talk about ascension, basically the elves, the trees, the, animals, plants, etc., they're all waiting for us to return to a more expansive consciousness. And when I say more expansive, I use that word expansive very deliberately, because it's not about higher or lower. It's about how many frequencies you can address and how broad your range of information pickup is. Each one of those frequencies is a different dimension. So let's just say, most people, if you're daydreaming, you're somewhere around 10 cycles per second. If you are in full beta consciousness, you're 12 to 14 cycles per second. When you get up to be high strung and really irritable, you're maybe 17 to 18 cycles. When you get above that into 20, 21, 22, 20, those are all dimensions. They all have different kinds of information available. And we used to be, the energy body of the human used to be configured differently than it is now. When and I talk about this in volume 3, the book that I did all the research on goddesses, but it's really, no, I take that back, it was volume 2, and then I expanded on it in volume 3. But every single form, whether you're talking about a single hydrogen atom, or a human being, or, a piece of metal, a car, or a tree, they are all looking for energy. They're all trying to get energy. And what are they going to do with that energy? They're going to use it to try to boost their own energy system enough to reconfigure it permanently at a new level of operation. The more that you expand, the more your chakras move within your system, and you begin to develop new chakras that take in new energy, new levels, new kinds of energy.
Okay.
And so it's a fascinating, we are programmed to evolve. And that's what ascension really is.
Got it.
It's the move to be able to channel huge amounts of energy through the system. And because energy is consciousness, okay? Consciousness and energy are just two sides of one coin. And consciousness is the feeling aspect of energy, and energy is the motion of consciousness. So that should tell you something right there. When you have energy moving, you have consciousness moving. The fact that the energy doesn't move very much or with very much power is because there isn't very much consciousness behind it. The more energy you have moving, the more consciousness you have available to you.
So the elves and the nature spirits are calling on us, you said, to be more expansive. And that
is exactly.
That means to move more energy.
That's right, because there comes a point in the evolution of that human where you move past death, where you're no longer subject to death. And that you move then into the realms of the eternal. And that what they have communicated, all of them, the trees, the animals, the water, the elves themselves representing the entire plant world, have all said the same thing. Come on, we're waiting for you guys. You are the ones who will move us into the realms of the eternal. And we are just not,
So
we're just now
can you
beginning to
offer
wake up.
us, can you offer some baby steps then here we have like another 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Please share some baby steps. And then I'm going to open this up for everybody listening and watching. I'm going to open this up to questions. So, but I think all of us are like, okay, how? A lot of us have been doing a lot of spiritual work. Please guide us.
Okay, so let me just give you a few tidbits. They may not all go together very nicely, but they're pretty interesting, most of them. So the first thing that you have to become aware of is how to breathe correctly. If you can do targeted in-breaths and at the same time create a picture in your mind of where that breath is going, at the same time you can feel it going there, at the same time you know the outcome and you're holding a picture of the outcome, then you are beginning to approach the realms of power, because a lot of it is done with breath. People do not know how to breathe, and when they do breathe, they're just breathing. They're not breathing consciously. They're not breathing deliberately. So it just last week, I was working on myself because of the pneumonia. And excuse me. Yeah. And so I'm doing this targeted in-breath, and I'm pushing on the side of my rib cage. Just, I don't know. I'll move my finger right there.
Okay. Yep.
So pushing on both sides, at the same time, and I'm breathing into those spots. When you hit those spots, it is incredibly sore when you have pneumonia or any kind of obstruction of breath or any back pain. And so I'm working, I'm breathing into those spots. I'm picturing the release of the lungs, and all of a sudden my the big muscles in my back let go. My hip lets go, my thigh lets go, my knee lets go and literally cracked. My calf started doing something weird with energy, and my foot started singing. And I was like, okay. So, so I worked at that. And
what did your foot do? You said your foot started, there was a little bit of a glitch there.
Started zinging.
It
just started. Zzz.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, so I worked at that for 2 hours, okay? So I get an email from one of my clients in Sweden, and he says, I had the most unusual experience last night, or a couple nights ago, whatever it was. And this was a couple nights after I had done this. And he said, I had this I think it was a dream. He said, I had a dream. You were in the dream, and you were working on my low back. And I woke up, he said, I've had this awful pain in my low back for the longest time, to the point that he's disabled, could not go to work sometimes. He said, and it was gone. He said, it was just gone. So I wrote back and I said,
him. Go ahead.
I was working. Here's the thing, when you work on yourself, it flows out to everybody around you. Oh. So, and I have to say, just point blank, we have seen several miracles, just out and out miracles. Like somebody's dying 1 minute and they're all better the next. And everybody's like, okay, what happened? What happened is that there's a total change in the energy. When you change the energy configuration of your body, you erase certain things, certain issues, certain problems.
Yeah.
So breath, very, very important. Another thing in terms of, how do you get there? There is, there's a lot of uproar in the country, in the U.S. right now. Oh my God. And not just us, Saudi Arabia, Asia, Europe. I mean, everything connected to the Western world is in uproar right now. But in in all of that uproar, during times of great uproar, there are amazing things that come out of the woodwork. And there is new healing. There are new healing computers that are coming out. You put a band around your head, you hold these two metal rods, you put your feet on a metal plate, and it sends these gazillions of frequencies through your body, and it resets you to your original energy, your original configuration.
Yeah.
It just erases. So what I have experienced and experimented with a little bit is electricity running through the system, because that's what Kundalini is. It's a huge, huge blast of electromagnetic energy pulsing through the system. And you can burst into flame and, burn up, and that's the end of you if something goes wrong. It accommodates you to this place where it begins to evolve you, where you can begin to handle more energy. You have to breathe correctly while you're doing that. Another thing, you can use food. It isn't the kind of food that you eat, it's the quantity of food. And so by reducing your quantity of food to an absolute minimum, and yet continuing to meditate, continuing to exercise, continuing to work, continuing to meditate, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's in volume 3, I talk about this 40-day fast that I did, in which I began turning into light, because that is what enlightenment is. And, so the quantity of food, when you restrict the quantity of food drastically, not eliminate it, and, it's really powerful. It changes your consciousness and expands it. So Tantra is another way of expanding that consciousness. You want to begin turning the body into light.
Yeah.
So that's the goal.
Do you have anything on your website that you have your books. Do you have teachings on the breathing that is a meditation on your website? Do you have anything like that? Or is all this information in your books?
Most of the information is in my books, but right now we are in the process, and I mean it's a heck of a process, of putting my classes up on the web so that people can take the classes. You download all the materials, you listen to the lectures, you look at the written material, and then you get on the phone once a week, and we have this, there's a group, and you become part of this conversation and ask questions, because people have a million questions. And so that's in process, and I've got a CD that has some breathing that is not up yet, but that's coming also, with this targeted in breathing. So it's coming.
What I'm going to do right now for everybody listening and watching is I'm going to open this up for questions. If you have specific questions for Penny right now, please type them into the chat box. If you look at the chat box on the bottom of the screen, Penny has got such an amazing mind and set of gifts. We started talking about the elves and the nature spirits, and clearly we're not going to lose focus on that, but waking up within ourselves and our becoming more of a light body obviously would wake us up to be able to communicate with the elves and the nature spirits better. I'm thinking about what you're saying about eating less food. I'm going, that may be hard for me. I get hungry, I need food. But I'm sure there are ways that we all can do that. So I'm not seeing anyone type any questions. Anybody have any questions? What about pixies? Someone has talked to me about pixies.
Well, while people are thinking about pixies it's a bastardization of the word Picts, P-I-C-T-S, which was an ancient race of Irish people who migrated from Eastern Europe who had an astounding set of skills. One of the last bastions make energy, could get the energy in anything to respond. They knew how to turn something into a living, I'm going to say, I'm going to use scientific language here, a massless object. Okay? One of my clients I had years ago came in. She was a psychic herself, and her grandparents were from Eastern Europe, Bulgaria or somewhere in there. And she was all upset because she happened to witness her grandmother asking the broom to get up and sweep the floor, and it did. And she was absolutely freaked out. And of course, then she, Grandma, what's going on? And the grandma immediately, took the broom and pretended she was sweeping. But she said, too late. I saw, I heard her talk to the broom. I saw the broom sweeping by itself. And it turned out that the Eastern Europeans still had a lot of those kinds of gifts. I think maybe a lot of that has been lost in our generation, but there are many things that are still possible if we care, to go back there and really make an effort to learn.
Yeah. So we have some questions that came in. Let me tell you the first one. Okay. It says, I'm still not clear on the difference between elves and fairies. Elves are nature spirits. What are fairies?
Fairies are energy forms that are, and maybe I should say, I'm not really sure 100% about fairies. What I have observed and what I have in my few interactions with fairies, they are support team members that form on request in order to do something for a plant. It isn't even really clear what they do, but they appear to restructure in some way, or renew, maybe that would be a better way of saying it, restore a plant that has been mechanically injured by the wind, by somebody stepping on it, by too much rain, that sort of thing, or that has suffered a freeze, or they will step in to accelerate the development of a fruit. Fairies do that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, they bring energy, extra energy to the plants. So I've only seen fairies, I'm going to call them free fairies, that weren't called maybe twice in my 40 years of working with nature. But when you call them, they're right there.
Okay.
So they seem to be something that even to me is not quite clear. But but anybody can learn to call fairies in, and they also will inhabit a space. And when they inhabit a space in large numbers, that space turns kind of a beautiful blue light, almost like an electric blue living light. And I have seen that and even photographed that in my backyard.
Fascinating.
But,
let me go to another question.
Go ahead.
Are gnomes and elves the same?
Just about. Gnomes is just another word for earth elves. Okay.
All right. So we have another question.
It's kind of an element. Yeah.
Okay. The next question is, you mentioned elves, quote unquote, withdrawing before something big happens. Where did they withdraw to?
You know what? I don't know. I can't even answer that. They have just said, why don't you leave? We leave. When when I was first, when the book, The Elves of Lily Hill Farm, first came out, an old man came to see me. And I'm going to say he was probably 75. And he said, when I was a boy, there were elves who lived in our house. He said, and everybody in the family saw them at one time or another, and they would lay at the top of the stairs, kind of all stretched out on their side, just watching, down the stairs at what all the humans were doing. And he said that at some point he finally said to one of them, why don't you go find someplace to live? And the elf said, we were here before you were. You just happened to build your house on top of our house. We're not leaving. And I have heard many people say that they just withdraw into nature. I have no idea where they go. I've tried to follow them in places that I thought were their homes. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. And so it's like, okay, all right, what they withdraw, I think my hunch is they withdraw from the plant and they know what the issue is going to be. If it's going to be a flood, they move to higher ground. If it's going to be a freeze, they move to higher ground. If it's going to be like a lightning storm or something like that is going to hit a tree, they vacate the tree and go to another tree.
They know
there are just they know in advance.
Yeah, because of the communications on those energy planes. So Laura has shared a nice story, but Laura, I'm going to ask if you can just share that on Facebook so that we can go on to other questions. Apologies for that. Here is a question from Gillian. The land I live on was traumatized earlier this year with brutal cuttings, etc. I was traumatized by how it was done. How might I make amends? I spoke to the trees expressing my sorrow. How do the intelligences feel or react to such acts?
Oh, they really feel that deeply. That is something that they feel so violated and so sad about. They do mourn in a very similar way to humans and animals, but they don't withdraw too much at all. There's elves everywhere. They're everywhere. I've been all over the world, and they are everywhere. If somebody cuts down a tree, that is a tragic loss for them. And they will gather around and try to comfort that tree while it's leaking its blood. Hang on a second. I must have not plugged my computer and it's going to run out of juice. Hang on.
Oh, no. Uh-oh. By the way, for everyone who's with us tonight, with your permission and blessing, I'm going to go an extra 4 minutes because we started... So we're going to end close to 9:19 or so Eastern Standard Time. So, can I say something here that I think will answer this to some degree? Because I'll try to make this brief. There was a massive matriarch tree cut in my neighborhood. And when I woke up that morning, I got very specific spiritual guidance to go walk to that neighbor's house. And I never go there in the morning. It was not my normal walking pattern. But I was told that morning, you have to go to that neighbor's house. And I saw the tree company trucks. So long story short, they were cutting down 2 trees, one that was rather dead, that was ready to go. And the other one was perfectly healthy and huge, but it was too close to the garage. And I got this spiritual call as I was walking away from the house. And I talked to the owner and I tried to convince him, can't you just cut a few limbs of that healthy tree? And then the message came through, because all the nature spirits here where I live, they all know I do a lot of sacred fire ceremony. And they said, please do ceremony tonight for the tree. So this is you, Gillian. Do ceremony. Call on the beautiful beings that you work with. Call on Earth Mother. Call on Creator. In doing ceremony, one of my friends shared with me that she got the sense that I was reweaving and healing the energy cuts, the cut in the energy lines. And I was providing an opportunity. I'm getting chilly bumps sharing this story with you. I was providing an opportunity for all of the nature spirits to grieve and to bring their sorrow for it to be transmuted in the ceremony. And I called in the ceremony the overarching tree devas of the planet. I just happened to be able to call on them, and they asked me to put a message out, and I wrote a blog piece, and I'll post it in our group, our Facebook group. But basically they said, we trees need love and light. We need gratitude and love from you humans because we are being so disrespected. So the same thing I'm sure goes to the nature spirits, the elves. We got this message last week with the bees. You know, can we offer them gratitude? And it's huge. It's absolutely huge. So even just like going out with a little piece of some tobacco or a little bit of smudge and offering your love. But you can do more ceremony than that too. So I wanted to share that. It would seem to make a difference. I felt the energy shift in my neighborhood doing that ceremony that night. There was a lot of gratitude that came forward from the trees and the nature spirit realms.
Yeah, you're much more graceful about losing a tree than I was. In the Elves book, I talk about a tree that was cut down by mistake, and my son-in-law cut it down, and what I did to him as a result. I read it now and I go, oh my God, did I do that? So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I won't say what it is because it'll ruin it, you know, if anybody wants to read the book. But yeah, that it's important to reweave and to rebuild that trust that, yes, we are aware of what has been lost, you know, and Alvy always said to me, and still does, you take a tree down, you plant 10 more to replace it. Wow. And so we do that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, because that's a really good message too. But I think this is where we as humans have a lot we can do in the ceremonial realms to work with the nature spirits to support them and send love and gratitude to them. So, okay, there are a couple other questions here. Oh boy,
okay.
Karma, that's a big one. There's a question here about, can she talk a bit about the Tantra as a method, target breathing, limits food? I was wondering about her perception, understanding of Tantra and nature element communication. You know what? I'm kind of wondering if that's something that we can bring up in the Facebook group. Is that all right? That's a huge question, unless there's a short answer.
That's a huge question, and it's a complex answer. Let me just sum it up at this point by saying what Tantra teaches you is to hold an intense form of energy, sexual energy, without doing anything about it. Because that's what you have to learn to hold when Kundalini is moving through you, or if you're going to expand your consciousness.
Interesting. Okay, someone else asked the question, can you speak to your experience moving the Kundalini energy through the body? That kind of overlaps with what you just shared. That's in one of your books, right? That's another, sorry, Laura, that's a really big question too.
Yes, you can move it through. You know, I would say maybe it would be a good idea to read my very first book, The Evolving Human. It's a true story. It's the story of my own Kundalini awakening. You know, it's not to be trifled with. And, you know, one of my clients just called last week, or just wrote, and she's struggling with the physical end of it, the body end of it. And excuse my French, she wrote back and she said, why doesn't anybody ever talk about the shit end of this process? And I was like, okay, yeah, we don't. We think that this whole, you know, I'm getting more spiritual is only about the consciousness. It's not. It's about the body. And as you know, as my teachers have said, it's all in the body, all of it.
Interesting. So, you know, this is, we need to wrap this up really shortly. By the way, to Cheryl, the link to the Facebook page is in the emails that have been going out to all of you with all the links of how to get into these webcasts. So please look to that email. And I will blog that, I will post the blog about the tree ceremony in the Facebook group, and I'll actually send that out in the email. It goes out tomorrow with our links. So to wrap this up, this has been so interesting, Penny. I knew this was going to be an amazing night. Thank you so much. I'm going to open up and share screen again briefly just to show everyone Penny's book. These are the two books she wanted to have us focus on tonight. She's written 5 others. But again, the Elves of Lily Hill Farm and Energy and Consciousness Volume 3. My sense is that if people who are listening tonight and watching this are really interested in the Kundalini experience, work with Penny. Work with her, because clearly, Penny, you're a very gifted healer and teacher. Her website is Consciousness on Fire. Keep on checking her website for when she gets her webinars up.
Yes.
And I know she's a busy lady doing so much, but you don't have a newsletter, do you, Penny? So you prefer people just keep on tracking your website. Yeah, I admire how you do that. I need to have a newsletter.
Yeah.
All right, so I need to then make an announcement of who's going to be with us next week. And again, Penny's website is Consciousness on Fire. And we can see that she is on fire, a very conscious woman on fire. Next week, we will have Kelly Lapsaritis join us. Kelly is another extraordinary woman who is a writer, a clairvoyant, and a medium working with several interdimensional beings, including Sasquatch. So please go to the Voices from Gaia website to read more about Kelly Lapsaritis and her background. She's writing another set of books that are messages from Sasquatch. And again, I will post, it's in the email that goes out tomorrow, and in the emails that went out today and on Monday about how to access the Facebook group. If you're having a hard time reaching that group, email me. My link is in there. Again, thank you, Penny, for a remarkable evening. I want to just devour all of your books. I'm glad I've ordered one to start with. So to everyone here tonight, thank you for your patience. We went a few minutes over because we started a few minutes late. And Penny, I'm honoring you. I'm glad you survived all that Kundalini experience and have brought so much wisdom forth to us. Huge, absolutely huge.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah. Have a great night. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you, Mare. Thank you for having me. And thank you for doing what you do. That's really important. There's not very many people doing it.
Thank you. I've surrendered to serve Mother, and I'm loving these interviews. Yeah. So on that note, I'm going to say good night to everybody and honoring you, Penny. I want to meet you in person someday. I'm determined to make this happen.
All right.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.